Influencer marketing has obviously been on quite a crazy journey, and in this talk, what I wanted to do was two things. Firstly, to almost talk about how we've got to where we've got to, and then more importantly, talk about the future of influencer marketing. Because I think, as everyone here, if you can pretty much predict the future, you can then actually front run it, and it can be probably the most important thing that happens to your entire business. And so just a quick introduction for me. So that's me there. So my name's Timothy Armu. I'm the founder and was the CEO of Fanbytes, and which I started in university 5 years ago. We scaled it to a team of 70 people, helping the world's biggest brands like these guys to reach everyone on social. So everyone from Nike to Delivery to McDonald's to all these brands here. And funny enough, we're having this conversation because there's a specific organization that we help that is very prominent now. Then that is these guys here. They probably need our help right now, but basically in 2020, we led all the messaging on COVID to Gen Z. So everything on TikTok and Instagram, everything around mental health, what to do at home, and all the way to the vaccine itself. So we're pretty knowledgeable about the influencer space, and perhaps the most exciting thing in that whole 5-year journey is about 2 months ago, we announced the biggest evolution, which was the fact that Fanbytes had just been acquired by a company called Brain Labs, and one of the biggest deals in the influencer marketing industry. And so we know a fair bit about the space, basically, to say. And I thought we'd share a bit about how we've actually got to where we've got to. So starting in 2010, you had the first real influencers, right? Or the first real social influencers. So people like KSI, Zoella, creating content in their bedrooms, and everyone was like, oh my God, these kids are making money in their bedrooms, oh my God. And then in 2016, you started really seeing the rise of these Instagram influencers, right? Really led by the Kardashians. That's when people were doing all their stuff around promoting waist trainers and fit tea. That was when you could get Kim to post about you for 10 grand, right? Those were the days. And then 2019, short form video really became a thing. And that was really led by TikTok there. And it completely changed the way that we saw social. It completely changed the way that we saw video. And then in 2020, of course, with the pandemic and everything that happened, everyone then said, right, we now need to find different ways to produce content. We now need to find different ways for people to have our content. And because we can't be together, we're going to now get influencers to create that content and users paid social. So there's this kind of evolution here. And the reason why I show that is because I think it's important to understand like what's happened in order to then understand what the future looks like. So we go to the present and three things, right? We've gone from the macro to the micro, right? So we've gone from the Zoella, KSIs of the world to now the micro influencers. But we've also gone into a world where there's a much lower barrier to content creation. Right now, everything is in our phones, and in the past, when we needed lighting and editing and all that stuff, it's like, right, just use your phones, done. And then also, influencer marketing is now blending with paid media. So that's kind of like the present state. So we've spoken about the past, spoken about the present, but now the sexy stuff is the future, and really what that means for marketers here. And so what about the future? And at Fanbytes, we like to think about it in these three ways, right? And given everything that's happened in the past, given everything that is happening now, we see these like three main changes happen. The first one is it is now possible to create your own influence, and we'll share some examples of how that works. But also, we think there's really the path for influencers to be used across the full funnel. In a world where everyone thought they were all about brand awareness, that's completely changed. And perhaps the third and the most prominent thing is that I do think that influencers are replacing the creative agency. And so if you work in a creative agency right now, it's going to be tough, mate. So on the first thing, right, about being able to create your own influence. So it did used to be the case, right, that once you had a significant number of followers, that was the thing that dictated if people saw your content or not, right? And there was a clear line between who was an influencer and who was the audience. And now that's actually changed considerably. And the reason why that's changed is because of these two things. And the first thing is because there's now lower barriers to entry. And so now anyone here can just create a piece of content, and hopefully it does well. But perhaps the most important thing is the way that the social algorithms now are playing the whole game. And so in the past, it was like, okay, this person's got a good amount of followers. That probably tells us that they create good content. Let's show it to more people. But now, how many times do we hear stories of someone who's just randomly jumped on TikTok, has no real followers, and their first video has 100,000 views? How many people here have just, I just created this reel, and suddenly 1 million people saw it? And the reason why is because like the social algorithms and all that whole game has changed. And so now there's like a blurred line between influencers and consumers. And now all these platforms here, which really are the dominant platforms here, like these short-form video platforms, are all using specific factors and specific rankings. And things that we all understand, things like rewatch rate, things like watch time, things like share rate. These are the things that are using to dictate whether a video is performing well or not. And if you know that, if you know the inputs that are going to lead to the outputs, then that means you can basically like predict the way that your content is going to do. It's no longer just hit and hope, work with an influencer, hope that it does well. You can actually do something really good about it. And the phrase that I use here is like, you can engineer out performance. So rather than it just being very much a hit and hope, let's see what happens, you can start to look at content and say, right, it's time to engineer this for watch time. It's time to engineer this for share rate. And you can start thinking about content in that way. And that is the way all the social algorithms are moving, and so it's very important for everyone here to start like thinking about it in that way. And I'll show you an example here. This is a client of ours, Back Market, and for those who don't know what they are, they're a marketplace for refurbished products. So rather than buying a new iPhone, what you can just do is just go buy a refurbished one for cheaper. And what they did was they came to us, and their whole thing was they were trying to drive awareness, drive engagement. And it was extremely easy for us to just say, right, so we're going to get some tech influencers to talk about it, and it's going to be great. But that doesn't feed into this idea of like creating your own influence and being able to play the algorithms at the game that they want. And so what we decided to do was create stuff which was actually optimized for the whole game of watch time here. So I'll show you an example of how this content looked to really bring it to life.
They've been making top-flight tech products for over 200 years.
My granddad has an iPhone 24. It's probably older than him.
Thank you for that. They recently updated their company logo and released the iPhone 72 Plus Pro.
That's a big stink piece of garbage. I literally have the iPhone 72 Plus Pro Max. I swear you got the iPhone 72 Plus Pro last week. Yeah, this one's the Plus Pro Max. What's the difference?
Okay, can we calm down, please? In the last 100 years, we've gone from this to this.
From garbage to sick.
If one more of you shouts out of turn, I'm going to hack your phone internet to only be able to use 8G for 2 weeks. Am I clear? Now, this is where I introduce you to Back Market, the highest quality refurbished technology marketplace.
Why would I use some random old dusty used phone?
They're not old, they're refurbished to the point where they're practically brand new. By going refurbished, you use 83% less water, over 11 times less CO2 emission per device.
That actually sounds quite smart.
You can get it by clicking the link on my bio.
Right? So they just turned the whole thing into a skit, led into watch time. And the effect when I talk about engineering out performance is that you end up getting things like this. This is all the content that particular creator has posted, 500,000, 400,000, etc. And then a sponsored video here gets 2 million. It gets 4x his average views. The reason why is because you can think about it by saying, how does this content sit? How is it going to blend into watch time? And that's the way we're engineering over performance. And a lot of brand marketers can use this exact same thinking. The next point here is about influencers being able to be used in a full funnel way. So this we constantly heard. For the last 10 years, this is what we've constantly heard. We want brand awareness. That's going to be great, blah, blah, blah. And that's what we use influencers for. But then we're constantly telling brands, I'm telling you, this thing can be used for a full funnel campaign. And here's the reason why it can be used for a full funnel campaign, because of what's happened now. Now there's more niche influencers with much more relevant content. And that creates a deeper trust with people. And that deeper trust creates a cult of personality. And the moment you have a cult of personality, you are more willing to take a deeper action than just liking their videos or just commenting on their videos. And so if you think about the marketing funnel from awareness, consideration, conversion, and all the way there, influencers can actually be used across that. And I implore a lot of marketers to start thinking about the game in that way and not just a game of like, well, that was great for brand awareness. And again, I'll show you an example here. And I picked this brand, ACCA, and the reason why I picked them is because I think they symbolize perhaps a lot of boring brands. There's no point me coming here and being like, well, here is how we help McDonald's sell more McFlurries. It's like, right, but they're also McDonald's. So it's important for me to choose a brand here, which perhaps might not be the sexiest brand in the world, but it's a brand which we'll be able to get a lot of learnings from. So the main thing here was around perception, but also around how exactly can we get more people to apply for something which in their mind seems, kind of dry, right? And so the way that we did it was in a 4-step way, touching every single part of the funnel. So the first bit was pretty straightforward. We got influencers to create content on their socials across TikTok and Instagram. We focused specifically on black females who saw accountancy as a profession for white males, but we also focused on those from a working class background. And then all they did was just talk about the world of accountancy. And for this, the main thing that we're trying to focus on was just the views and just getting people talking about it. And as you can see there from a study we did in brand recall, you see that outperformed well. And it was like, okay, that's nice. That's a really good thing for the top of the funnel. But how do we get into the consideration phase? If we do believe that actually there's a cult of personality that's happened with influencers, how can we move them further down the funnel? And so what we then decided to do was get the best performing influencers to then create surveys and put it on their own socials. And by doing that, we picked the best ones from the previous stage, and then we just got them to just ask people, what do you actually think of accountancy? Remember, this is not the sexiest topic in the world. But what happened is because they built that fan base, that niche, relevant fan base, we ended up getting 130,000 responses to people talking about accountancy. And then we used those principles to then form an event we did, a virtual event that we did. So you can see how at each stage we're effectively taking the most engaged, the people who've built that depth, and just moving them further and further down the funnel. And for this one, what we did was, again, using the insights from step 2, we then built this event, which was a virtual event, the best performing ones from there, those who had already built a deep engagement. We then used them to tell people about an ACCA event. And if you can see there, the results were like 5,000 event signups. In the history of the ACCA, they haven't had that many people sign up to an event ever. Why? Because of this idea of going niche and also understanding that they can be used for the full funnel. And then the final bit of that, of course, was step 4, is we then, using our data, we could look at people who had already been talking about the Big Four, talking about EY, talking about PwC, and we pair them up with the best performing people from step 2 and step 3. And then now you've built this really cool fan base of people who already vibe with the ACCA, who already know the brand and everything else. And as you can see here, the results ongoing week-on-week increase in applications. So you see how this stage just goes from every single step of the funnel. So I encourage a lot of marketers to almost start to think in that way when they're thinking about influencer marketing, because we've gone from a world where all you could do was just get likes, comments, that's all cool, to now things being more niche and now things being more focused. And what you need to do is, use your data and use creativity in order to then land these results. And then the final thing here is influencers replacing the creative agency. This I feel very strongly about, because I do think that over time, you probably want to have everything centralized. So what is the modern day creative agency? So for me, it's probably these 3 things, right? They come up with great ideas, and that's cool, and then they come up with storyboarding and production and all that stuff. But then what you start to see is, an influencer was typically seen as someone just for distribution, right? We've created our stuff, we just give it to them to push out. But surely an influencer would be the best person to basically do all the stuff that I've just showed, because they understand the trends, so they come up with the ideas anyway, right? They understand the storyboarding, because fundamentally they're creating content that gets watched, so they understand how each frame should look. And then also, production, they use their phones to do that anyway. And they then have distribution, and they can do all of that in a fraction of the time and a fraction of the cost. And so as you start to think about influencers in that way, not just as distribution, it actually becomes very obvious that these guys are going to disrupt the typical creative agency. And I'll show you a final example here with our work with Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed. So they came to us, and their whole thing was pretty simple. They had these two main problems. First was creative fatigue. It's like, right, people keep seeing the same thing over and over again, and I know they're getting bored because our click-through rate is, getting worse, but also it's taken us a lot more time for us to create content. And so we then built a product, our Fanbytes Create product, and what that was pretty simple. It's basically where we get a bunch of influencers and creators to come up with their own ideas as to how they'll promote a brand. The brand picks the ones that they want, and then they can then use that for their paid social. So all that, we got 20 pieces of content in 5 days. Why? Because we didn't go through this big briefing with a creative agency and do all that stuff. It was just like, right, there you go. You tell us the ideas. Okay, that sounds good. Film it. Done. And that took 5 days to do that, to get like 20 influencers to create this content. And I'll show you an example of how this content actually looks here, just to get a general sense of it. Very simple, but we had her and 19 other people creating their own versions of how they would interpret the Assassin's Creed, gave that all to Ubisoft, and then they run the ads on that, 5-day turnaround, 20 varied assets, and that was the increase in the return on ad spend. And that was a very quick thing. That was basically something happening on a Monday and them getting it by Friday. And this is why we believe that for the future, influencers are going to replace the creative agency. But then the final thing on that is I don't think that it stops there. Now, ever since the acquisition by Brain Labs, I've had a number of people ask me, so why did you sell the business and all that? And this is one of the main reasons why, is because we see influencer marketing as part of the overall mix. And in a world where it fits things like display and programmatic and out of home, that really is where we see it landing, not just as a distribution channel, but actually as a creative format and a creative channel in its own right. I think it's very important that as marketers, we think about them in this multi-dimensional way. And so to summarize, these are the 3 predictions that we see really happening for the influencer world. And I wanted, again, to share what's happened in the past because it's very important to see how that flows in for the future. And one last thing, this was just, I had 15 minutes. That was just one final thing here is, that was just kind of like the tip of the iceberg of what we see happening in the influencer world. And at Fanbytes, one of the things that we have created is actually a more extensive report around where we see not only influencer marketing, but also Gen Z going as well. And so if you want to get that report, ping us an email there, hello@Fanbytes, and we'll be happy to chat to you. See you in a bit.